Welcome, everyone, to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a closer look at the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah, beyond just Mickey Mouse and, theme parks, we're really going to dive into how this company turned into such a giant.
It's a fascinating story, and I think a lot of people wonder, like, how did they get so big? What are some of the challenges they face now?
Yeah, a lot of things have changed in the world since Walt Disney first, started drawing cartoons as a kid.
Exactly. So let's go back to the very beginning, shall we? Walt Disney himself. He actually started as a cartoonist in high school, drawing for his school newspaper.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He's already honing his skills back then, drawing patriotic images inspired by World War One.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think like those very early sketches were kind of the foundation for this whole empire.
And he just had this entrepreneurial spirit from such a young age. I mean, in 1921, when he was only 20 years old, he co-founded this studio called Laugh-O-Gram Studio.
Laugh-O-Gram Studio.
Yeah.
And they produced this short film called Alice's Wonderland, blending animation and live action, which even back then was pretty innovative.
Super ahead of his time.
Yeah.
But even visionaries, they face setbacks. Laugh-O-Gram actually went bankrupt in 1923.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's true. And just imagine, the resilience that it took for Walt to just pick himself up after that and head to Hollywood with his brother Roy.
With Roy to start over.
Yeah, and that's where they founded, the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio.
So that was the real start.
That's where things really get going. And, it's interesting when you think about Disney and intellectual property, they had this character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit.
Oh, yeah. I remember Oswald.
Well, they ended up losing the rights to that character in a contract dispute with Universal.
Oh, wow. Really?
It was a huge turning point for them because it really forced them to think differently about how they owned and controlled their creations.
That's crazy to think about losing the rights to your own character.
It is, but in a way, that loss actually led to the creation of a legend.
Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse, originally named Mortimer, actually.
Mortimer Mouse.
Can you imagine? Thank goodness Walt's wife Lillian convinced him to change it.
I think that was a good call.
Yeah, Mickey Mouse was born, and in 1928, Steamboat Willie hit the screens.
The first cartoon with a synchronized soundtrack.
It was revolutionary, and the rest, as they say, is history.
History.
Yeah.
But it's not just about, one iconic character. It's about how Disney built this entire system for success. And I think that's where the whole concept of the Disney flywheel comes in.
Yeah, the Disney flywheel. That's really the core of their success, this idea that everything kind of feeds into everything else.
I've heard that term before, but honestly, I'm not totally sure. I get it. Can you break it down for me?
Sure. So basically it starts with creating amazing content, right?
Oh.
Like Steamboat Willie or later, the classic films like Snow White.
Right.
That content, it drives people to the theme parks because they want to experience those stories firsthand.
Makes sense.
And then you've got merchandise sales, which feed back into creating even more content. It's like the self-sustaining cycle.
So it's like the magic fuels everything and then everything fuels more magic.
Precisely. And that flywheel really started spinning, with the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937.
The first full-length animated film.
It was a huge gamble for Disney, but it paid off big time.
It was a global phenomenon.
It was. And it allowed them to build, their legendary studio lot in Burbank, California, which is still their hub to this day.
And then, of course, came Disneyland in 1955.
Yeah, this wasn't just an amusement park. It was a revolutionary concept. Walt wanted to create a place where families could actually step into the world of their favorite Disney stories.
It really was groundbreaking, and it completely changed the theme park industry.
It did. But the 60s brought, both joy and sorrow for Disney. They released classics like 101 Dalmatians and Mary Poppins. But then in 1966,
Walt Disney passed away.
a huge loss for the company and for the world.
It was. But his brother Roy, he carried the torch and oversaw the completion of Walt Disney World in Florida.
A fitting tribute to Walt's vision.
Absolutely. And it opened in 1971.
And, Disney just continued to grow from there. They ventured into live-action films. They opened Tokyo Disneyland in 1983.
Their first park outside of the U.S.?
Yep. And they launched the Disney Channel, bringing the magic into homes all over the world.
So they were really diversifying at that point.
They were. They wanted to be more than just an animation studio. They wanted to be a dominant force in the entire entertainment landscape. And then came the 80s, and with it, a new era for Disney.
The Michael Eisner era.
Yeah.
He became CEO in 1984. And that's when we see what's often called the Disney Renaissance.
Right. Think about films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion
All the
King.
classics.
They were huge hits, and they really revived the magic of Disney animation, They reminded everyone why they were the kings of storytelling.
They were. And Eisner also made some pretty significant acquisitions, bringing companies like Miramax and ABC under the Disney umbrella.
Yeah, but the real turning point came in the early 2000s when they made a series of acquisitions that completely reshaped the entertainment landscape. I mean, just think about it. Pixar in 2006,
Pixar Marvel in 2009.
Lucasfilm, home of Star Wars in 2012,
Wow.
and then this mega deal, 21st Century Fox in 2019.
It's like they were assembling an entertainment infinity gauntlet.
They were. These acquisitions gave them control of some of the most beloved and lucrative franchises in the world.
But even with all that success, it seems like things haven't been totally smooth sailing for Disney lately.
Right.
That's right.
They've been facing some pretty strong headwinds, both internally and externally, and those challenges really came to a head in recent years. But before we dive into that, let's talk about the man who's at the helm now, steering this ship through some pretty choppy waters.
Bob Iger. He returned as CEO in late 2022, marking his second stint at the helm of the company.
It was a dramatic comeback story, and he was brought back to help Disney navigate some pretty significant challenges. One of the most vocal critics they've faced recently is Nelson Peltz.
Nelson Peltz, an activist investor who wasn't shy about expressing his concerns about the direction Disney was heading in.
Right. Activist investors like Peltz, they acquire a large stake in a company, and then they use that leverage to try and influence its decisions to increase shareholder value. And Peltz, he had some pretty strong opinions about how Disney should be run.
He was pushing for cost-cutting changes to the board, questioning some of their strategic decisions. It was a pretty high-stakes battle.
It was a battle of visions for the future of the company.
So that brings us to where Disney stands today. Facing all these challenges, from a declining stock price to this rapidly evolving entertainment landscape.
It's a really interesting moment for them because they have this incredible legacy, this powerful brand built on storytelling and creating these magical experiences.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes this story so fascinating.
Yeah.
We've only just scratched the surface. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into the challenges Disney faces today and how Iger is trying to steer them through it.
Stay tuned. Welcome back. So we were talking about Disney's incredible journey from, those early days to now facing some serious challenges in the entertainment industry.
It really is remarkable to see how much the industry has changed and how Disney is trying to adapt.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest indicators of those challenges is their stock price.
Yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride, hasn't it? I mean, they hit an all-time high back in 2021, over $200 a share. But as of just a few days ago, December 27th, 2024, it was down to $111.55.
That's a pretty significant drop, and it reflects a lot of different pressures they're facing. The pandemic obviously hit their theme parks and cruise lines pretty hard.
Right.
And then there's the whole streaming war that's been going on.
Oh, yeah, the streaming wars. I feel like every other week there's a new streaming service popping up.
It's overwhelming for consumers, and it's definitely a battleground for companies like Disney. They're up against Netflix, Amazon, Apple, all fighting for a piece of that streaming pie.
And then you had Nelson Peltz kind of adding fuel to the fire with his criticisms and his calls for change.
Right. Peltz and other investors were really concerned about Disney's spending, especially on their streaming platform, Disney+. They felt like the company needed to rein things in and focus on profitability.
Which is where Bob Iger comes in.
Yeah.
It's almost like a superhero story. He swoops back in to save the day.
It really is a dramatic comeback. He stepped down in 2020, but then came back as CEO in late 2022 to try and get Disney back on track. And one of the first things he did was to address those concerns about spending. He initiated a pretty significant cost-cutting plan.
Including job cuts, unfortunately. It's never easy to see that happen, but it shows how serious he was about trying to streamline operations.
Exactly. It was a message to Wall Street that Iger was taking their concerns seriously. But cost-cutting is only one part of the equation. The heart of Disney really lies in their content.
Their films, their stories, their ability to create these immersive experiences.
And that's where Iger's strategy gets interesting, because remember how they went all in on streaming initially? Well, it seems like he's shifting gears a bit and putting a renewed emphasis on theatrical releases.
Back to the big screen experience.
Exactly. Because those big theatrical releases, they generate huge box office revenue. And they create a lot of buzz and excitement that can then drive interest in Disney Plus later on.
So it's like a 1-2 punch, hitting theaters first and then streaming later.
And we see that strategy playing out with their decision to turn the planned Moana series for Disney Plus into a theatrical sequel, Moana 2.
Moana was such a big hit. I was surprised to hear they were scrapping the series.
It makes sense, though, when you think about the potential financial upside of a theatrical release. Plus, it allows them to build even more hype for the franchise before it eventually lands on Disney Plus.
And they've got a bunch of other sequels in the works, too. Inside Out 2, Deadpool 3, even a Lion King prequel focused on Mufasa. They're really tapping into those familiar stories and characters that people love.
Nostalgia is a powerful thing, and especially in times of uncertainty, people often turn to things that bring them comfort and joy. But Iger isn't just relying on sequels and familiar franchises. He's also exploring new avenues for growth, particularly in gaming and sports.
Two areas where Disney has had a bit of a mixed track record in the past.
That's true, but they seem to be approaching these ventures with a new sense of focus and determination. Their recent partnership with Epic Games is a great example.
Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite.
That's right. They invested $1.5 billion in Epic Games as part of a deal to develop a whole new gaming universe.
That's a huge investment. It shows how serious they are about tapping into that market.
And it makes sense strategically. Epic Games has a massive global audience, especially among younger demographics, which is a key target for Disney.
And they're tapping into that whole metaverse concept, which is still kind of in its early stages, but has huge potential.
And it plays to Disney's strengths, creating immersive experiences and storytelling.
Absolutely. And then on the sports side of things, you've got ESPN, which is a huge asset for Disney. But the cable TV market is shrinking, so they need to find ways to adapt to the streaming world.
Exactly. And they're doing that by teaming up with Warner Bros. Discovery and Fox to launch a new sports streaming service.
So it's like combining forces to create this ultimate sports streaming platform.
Exactly. They're bringing together ESPN, TNT, Fox Sports, all under one roof. It's a bold move, and it's a direct response to the cord-cutting trend that's been happening.
People want convenience, and they want to be able to watch what they want when they want it.
And by partnering with Warner Bros. Discovery and Fox, Disney can share the cost of content production and reduce their financial risk. But it's not without its challenges.
What kind of challenges?
Well, if this new streaming service is too successful, it could actually accelerate the decline of cable TV, which still generates a lot of revenue for Disney. It's a delicate balancing act.
So they're trying to embrace the future without completely cannibalizing their existing business.
It's a tough spot to be in. And all of these strategies, the cost-cutting, the focus on theatrical releases, these new ventures in gaming and sports, it all begs the question, how does this fit into the Disney flywheel that we talked about earlier?
That's a good point, because the flywheel has been so essential to their success for so long, but the world is changing. Consumer habits are changing. Technology is changing.
So is the flywheel still relevant? Does it need to be reimagined?
These are the questions that Bob Iger and his team are trying to answer.
And the answers to those questions will determine the future of the Walt Disney Company.
Welcome back to our deep dive. It's been quite the journey learning about Disney.
It really has, from a small animation studio to this global entertainment giant. Pretty incredible.
And we've talked about all these challenges they're facing right now. Declining stock prices, intense competition in streaming, and of course, activist investors like Nelson Peltz.
And the big question is, can they overcome these obstacles? Can they adapt to this rapidly changing entertainment landscape?
That's what we're trying to figure out, and it seems like there's this constant tension between maintaining the magic of Disney and the pressures of, being a publicly traded company.
Yeah, you have to keep the shareholders happy, but at the same time, you don't want to lose sight of what makes Disney special.
Exactly. So how do you strike that balance? How do you appease investors like Nelson Peltz without sacrificing the heart and soul of the company?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's a question that Bob Iger is wrestling with right now.
And we've talked about his strategy, the cost-cutting, the focus on theatrical, releases the new ventures in gaming and sports.
But I think the key to all of this is how they leverage their intellectual property.
Yeah.
Those iconic characters and stories that people love.
It's about finding new ways to bring those stories to life on different platforms, whether it's streaming, gaming, the metaverse, or even new theme park experiences.
It's about adapting that Disney flywheel to this new world, creating new connections between their stories and audiences.
But the competition is fierce. I mean, Disney isn't competing with other traditional media companies anymore.
They're up against tech giants like Apple and Amazon who have a ton of resources, and they're trying to reach a generation that has more entertainment options than ever before.
So how does Disney stand out in this crowded marketplace? How do they recapture that sense of wonder and magic that they're known for.
I think it comes down to authenticity. Staying true to their core values, the storytelling, the imagination, the things that have always resonated with audiences.
They can't just chase trends or try to copy what everyone else is
They
doing.
need to focus on what makes them unique, what makes them Disney.
And I think Bob Iger gets that. He understands the power of their stories and the importance of maintaining that Disney magic.
But it's not just about the stories themselves. It's about how those stories are told, how they're presented, and how they're woven into all the different parts of the Disney empire.
That's what the Disney flywheel is all about, creating a seamless experience for the consumer, no matter how they're interacting with the brand.
Whether they're watching a movie, visiting a theme park, or playing a video game.
And that's where I think Disney has a real advantage. They have this incredible ecosystem, this interconnected web of content and experiences that no one else can really match.
It's a powerful asset, but it's an asset that needs to be managed carefully and strategically.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Disney, what are your final thoughts? Can they overcome these challenges? What does the future hold?
It's hard to say for sure. The entertainment industry is constantly evolving, but I think Disney has a lot going for them. They have strong leadership, they have a rich history of storytelling, and they have a loyal fan base that spans generations.
And they have that incredible flywheel, which, if they can adapt it to this new landscape, could continue to drive their success for years to come.
So while there's definitely some uncertainty ahead, I think it's safe to say that the story of the Walt Disney Company is far from over.
And that's a story we'll all be following closely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those curious minds engaged.
And remember, the world is full of fascinating stories, just waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.